And she had this, box theory where it's, this idea that when men meet you, they put you into one of three boxes within the first 5 minutes. They either want to date you, they want to sleep with you, or they want nothing to do with you. And once you are put in that box, you cannot move from box to box, no matter what you do. If you're a great person, if you're in the hookup box, you're not moving to the other box. And if you're, in this dating box, you can do whatever you want. One, like a direct quote is, you can throw up in his bed and he will still want to date you.
Hey guys, welcome to the Emily and Todd podcast. Today we have a very special guest in studio, Charlotte, aka Welcome to the Peasant Party. Before we get started, please remember to like and comment on this video as it does really help with the YouTube algorithm. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I know I've talked with both of you before. Excited to meet two very notable people in person and just chat with you about a lot of different topics. I know we've got a lot to discuss.
Yeah, Todd and I are excited. I mean, you grew a pretty big TikTok following not too long ago.
Yeah,
really.
Kind of just happened by accident.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm sure our audience would be interested in hearing the story behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably about a little less than a year ago today, to the date, had TikTok, just downloaded during the pandemic, obviously, used it for fun. It was in digital marketing, so it was kind of like the next big thing. Like to see what people were doing. I was kind of fiddling around with it on a personal level, like doing house tours or home reno type stuff. And then probably, May of 2022, was at brunch with a few girlfriens, and we were kind of talking back about just old stories, and was telling a story about how one of my friends had, in my opinion, dated a guy. She, 1 month of, consistently going on dates with him. He was her date to the company holiday party. We worked at the same company. And I described him as the guy she dated. And she said, we didn't date. We were never boyfriend, girlfriend. And I said, well, no, you actively went on a bunch of dates with him. That's dating. And it was this big, just kind of like sparring of, what is dating? She said, no, we were just talking. And kind of just ended on one of those like agree to disagree type situations. I hate when people tell me agree to disagree. So
couldn't let it go.
Nope, can't let things go. So like a normal, rational adult, I went home and I found like a little old composition book, and I made like a little thing of stages where it showed, this talking stage. That's your window of time before you go on that first date. Like you match with someone on a dating app, or you meet someone out, like, oh, when's our date going to be? And then you go on that first date, you keep doing it, that's dating. And then I took it to TikTok and then made, video. I think some big creator like stitched it or something. And then all of a sudden it went viral, and it was kind of fun. Of course, like it started a debate in the comments, very much like millennial versus Gen Z, regional, which was kind of fun. Like, I don't know what British people call certain things, but England chimed in at one point. And yeah, kind of from there, I'm like, maybe there's a niche here, like just kind of having fun as a marketer. Probably the next weekend, had another similar brunch table conversation, a friend telling an experience about how she'd been ghosted. We get kind of more information off of that. And it was a guy that she'd matched with on a dating app who stopped talking to her. And I said, wait a second, that's not ghosting. Like when you think of ghosting, you think of, someone who you'd been basically maybe like in a relationship with, you've been seeing, and then all of a sudden they disappear into the night. And so it was like, that's not ghosting. So I made a little chart of, what's ghosting or not. And I realized like I'm out of my element trying to draw this. So I got my computer, did it on a PowerPoint. And then that kind of became the second chart of what is or isn't ghosting. Like when are you an asshole kind of thing. So that was chart number 2, viral as well. And then I realized we have a niche on our hands. And so I was kind of excited about that too, because I used a lot of like PowerPoint type templates that I would use for work. I was told by a boss, like, hey, like, let's work on your public speaking. So it was kind of nice in that way as well. It was also kind of a cool way to keep myself out of it. Like I always found dating topics really interesting, but I never wanted to be one of those people who was doing chronicles of my life or sharing personal stories or like invading people's privacy. So it felt like a good way to talk about something, but keep myself removed. And then I think from there, I'm trying to think of what topic came next, but really it's, that's kind of the sum of it. Have been doing that ever since. I choose topics based on audience demand. I'll usually go like adjacent as well based on whatever topic I covered. But it's been a lot of fun, really fun audience as well. Yeah.
And at this point, you probably have hundreds of charts. I think I watched one of your TikToks and it was just like on and on and on and on about all these charts.
All of them, yeah.
And I just thought that was really cool. And honestly, like when it comes to your charts, I thought they were very groundbreaking in a way because they were breaking things down in a very digestible manner, which really hadn't been seen before. I mean, I saw you as the kind of the female wheat waffles, as far as different
Yeah.
perspectives on things. But at the same time, he has that ability to kind of put charts out there and then have it make sense. And you were doing the same thing kind of with relationships and the whole dating sphere. And it's something that I really believe that a lot of the guys in our audience could really benefit from watching some of your content because it's really good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would welcome any of your audience to watch my content. I probably have, when I've looked at my audience, it's about a 60-40 female-male split, which is really rare when you see like dating content. A lot of it's like dating for men, dating for women. I firmly believe anyone of any gender can be ghosted, experience heartbreak. Like those are very real feelings. I also just kind of going through TikTok, I never liked some of the toxicity you would see where it would be, kind of like women like berating men just for their bad dates and whatnot. I have a younger brother who's kind of that same age range. So I really wanted to keep everything positive. I keep things humorous where I can, positive. And if I'm going to laugh at anything or make anything the joke, it's going to be me or the ridiculousness of 2023. Kind of the goofy words people use. I never like to like laugh at anyone's pain just because dating's a sensitive topic. You'll see people kind of commenting in, after a bad date or something. And I like to give people that empathy when that kind of thing happens. But yeah, really good, male, female audience that's just really just kind. Like the DMs I get from all the men are just incredibly sweet about, people they're interested in, what should they do, maybe when they're not interested in someone, how do I say no? Like a lot of questions like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I've really consumed a lot of your content myself, and I think a lot of it is very grounded because you're not really biased in the male versus female perspective. You're really just kind of middle of the ground. So that makes sense why you're kind of middle of the ground with your followers.
Yes, very middle of the road. And I really think that that's not all that unique when you look outside of TikTok. I think that's like another theme I see with some of my content is just some of these kind of goofy buzzwords people use. Like if you go out in the world, people aren't necessarily talking like that. Just like if you go out in the world, like some of these like just crazy people that seem to want TikTok fame don't reflect the average person dating. And it can be kind of discouraging to, no matter your gender, just seeing, you go on there, you see someone talking about their bad date and you're like, oh man, like this is really discouraging. Not everyone's like that.
Yeah, and you do a really good job at just stepping back and breaking down that dating situation rather than getting really personal, and attacking that person that's having the issue. And I'd say the same goes for other creators that you've stitched. You attack the idea.
Yes.
Rather than them. And one of those creators is a creator that's known for her box theory. She goes by the name of Tinks.
Yes.
And so I want to get into that. You've had some content out there talking about why you disagree with this box theory. So maybe just break it down for our audience that may have never heard of it.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of zoom out, just as far as who Tinks is, very female-oriented influencer. I want to say she's in her early 30s, lives in LA, Stanford graduate, family has a lot of money. She's flying out to London all the time. So that just kind of gives some background on who she is and where this advice comes from. Her audience is primarily early 20s women, maybe college, recently out of college. Maybe they just moved to a big city. She started on TikTok doing lifestyle stuff, started talking about her dating life. People wanted to hear more. She's dating influencer. Then she had this, box theory where it's, this idea that when men meet you, they put you into one of three boxes within the first 5 minutes. They either want to date you, they want to sleep with you, or they want nothing to do with you. And once you are put in that box, you cannot move from box to box, no matter what you do. If you're a great person, if you're in the hookup box, you're not moving to the other box. And if you're, in this dating box, you can do whatever you want. One, like a direct quote is, you can throw up in his bed and he will still want to date you. And that's kind of just the mindset. I firmly kind of disagree with it just because I think it's, if you consider first like where it's coming from and Tinks and just kind of the lay of the land of LA, like I think that's a whole other story, just how people in LA interact with each other. But I really disagree with that for the most part because I think as a whole, how you treat people matters. This kind of implication of, box theory, kind of takes men's feeling out of the equation and, women's accountability as far as like, what you want and owning your standards. I think if you say, they're putting you into this box when they first meet you, the guy that goes on a handful of dates and, was interested in dating you and changes his mind, that kind of sends the message to the woman like, oh, he was only after a hookup. It makes him look like the bad guy. Men are allowed to, be interested and change their mind. Like, it's kind of really unfair to imply otherwise. It also just kind of, if you're looking back at the situation, like this whole oh, no matter what you do, they could have, you were just in a box anyways. If you did something shitty, there's no accountability for it. The whole throw up in his bed, if the right kind of guy won't want you to throw up in his bed, that would turn him off. You don't get to just overlook that. And I think it kind of, as you go from, guy that things don't work out after you sleep with them, and you just say, oh, I was just in a box the whole time, versus saying what did or didn't work, what could I do differently and grow from this? It just takes that all out of the equation. And I think it also, the implication kind of on the front end as you're meeting men is just to kind of be flighty, not say what you want because it's empowering to pretend to be too cool to want a relationship. And I think that kind of affects kind of, what men are thinking in the moment. I think there's a lot of, show not tell. If you think of LA lifestyle, and there's kind of this, oh, don't let anyone know how you're feeling. Don't say what you want. I think that's kind of affecting the Tinks perspective as well. Mm-hmm. If that all makes sense.
I was gonna debate you on this, but now that you said it that way, I'm probably gonna take a step back. The only thing that, I think that probably does exist, but it's not after 5 minutes.
Yeah.
The timeline doesn't make sense.
The timeline doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But I think if a guy spends enough time with a woman, he's probably going to put her in kind of one of those 3 boxes. I think, first of all, it's going to be kind of a yes or no to begin with. So, am I interested in this person at all for anything?
Yeah.
Or not? Where, Emily always says, for women, there's 3 buckets. Yes, no, and maybe. For guys, there's really not that much maybe. Because they're either kind of attracted or not. And if we are, then we'll take it to the next step. But if we're not, it's kind of in that no category. So, but then I think a man needs to take some time as far as getting to know her. And so if she has behaviors that correspond with what he's looking for, and then he's probably going to go the relationship route. But I think if he sees her as somebody that is not relationship material, but is really attractive, depending on the guy, I think he'll go there sexually.
I think the attraction versus not attraction, I think, is pretty kind of set in, I think, women, we kind of have that more of that, maybe what's his personality kind of thing, what's kind of going on in his head. But I think it depends, the kind of the scenario where women meet men. I think there's also just this kind of show not tell that women can do as far as situations you meet people in, because I don't agree with box theory and relationship material versus girlfriend material just by looking at someone. I think women send off signals. So I think if you think of Tinks, who's in LA, you go and you meet someone out at some gala, some party gala with a bunch of celebrities, and then you get someone's number, and the next day, oh, are you going to the next gala? You're sending the message that you don't want a relationship. I think if you the next day send a text saying hey, it was great to meet you, how are you feeling? Did you have one too many drinks last night? And it kind of sends the message that you're looking to get to know someone. You think of LA culture, I grew up an hour north of LA, so I just that's something that's on my mind when I hear these Tinks ideas. It's you're kind of sharing an idea that's not really relatable to the mass audiences. The average everyday, 18 to 22-year-old woman is not doing Tink stuff, hanging out in the hills of LA with a bunch of rich people. So I think that's where her idea comes from. Everyone talks about the LA no, where nobody ever says what they're feeling. No one will ever say no to you in LA. They'll say oh, I'll think about it. So I think that is kind of where her perspective's coming from.
Okay. Interesting.
I agree with both of what you guys were saying. I think I can understand how there could be occasions where a man is seeing a woman, and maybe it is just because how she is portraying herself, that he could potentially already kind of be deciding that he wouldn't date her.
Yes.
You know, like, I think that's possible. I just think it's rare. Like, I don't think that that's the typical thing that is happening. That's why I agree with you in that it does take the accountability out from the woman, because she probably was just physically attractive enough that he was interested in her. You know, it was a yes for him. And then as he got to know her, she probably did some sort of behavior that he didn't like. And then either he cut it off or he just went with sleeping with her. And then eventually things ended. And then she just blames it on, oh, he always wanted to only want to sleep with me. You know, he's a bad guy. And I don't think that's what happens the majority of the time.
No, I would agree with that. I don't disagree with that. I think most men probably look at each individual situation and say, you know, just like women are doing with men, they're kind of evaluating as they go along. I think the difference with guys, but maybe it is changing nowadays, is that women are doing this too, is that they may not have the best intentions. And so that's pretty common, I think, with younger guys, that they'll end up going there and they'll be deceptive in a way because they have got to the point where they figured out, I know that this is not somebody that I'm interested in long term, or the more important part is they may not be ready for long term. So they'll do this with anybody. So I think
like,
that
no one's fitting into the I'll date you box.
Yes, because
there is no I'll date you box.
Because why would they if they're getting an abundance and they're young?
Yeah.
And you know, that's their value system. So I think, but with women, it's the same way as far as like they're going to, if they're in that maybe box, they're going to see how that plays out. And if it works, if the guy grows on them, then maybe they'll give him a shot. But if not, then they'll probably walk away. But I'm wondering, in maybe the Gen Z, are some of these women going there because it's empowering as well? You know, kind of dating like men typically would.
Yeah, like they have a I'll just sleep with him bucket.
I don't know.
Themselves.
I mean, I'm just wondering, you know, because hookup culture is so pervasive in our culture right now. If you know, women have to be complicit in this.
Yeah.
Or do you think that it's their way of, you know, kind of locking down the guy?
I feel like maybe it's my generation, but I feel like it's more them wanting to lock down the guy.
That's what Charlotte's here.
I know. I will be interested to know Charlotte's perspective on that, but I do still feel like it's more about locking down the guy, because women can kind of get the guy, at least to sleep with, that she also would like to date. You know, so I think that like both of those are typically occurring at the same time, that the guy that she's sleeping with is the guy that she wants to date. So she's not going to sleep with the guy that she doesn't want to date.
Okay.
Because like, why do that? Because there's probably 4 other guys that are guys that she would be attracted to, she wants to sleep with and wants to date.
Okay.
So why not pick those, you know?
I mean, I think like if you're thinking of like younger generation, I think there's a lot of just confusion and uncertainty all around, just like kind of, you know, growing up and trying to figure out what you want in general. Like I think of just, you know, looking back to age 22 to 25, like just not really knowing what you want. Like I firmly believe a lot of times, you know, when guys say like, I'm not ready for a relationship. And then, you know, that's kind of the, you know, hey, like, you know, not like the silent with you. And then all of a sudden, you know, 2 weeks later, they're dating somebody else. I genuinely think when guys say that, they mean it at the time. It's just kind of one of those, I know it when I see it. Like, I think there's a lot less like Machiavellian villains running around, like men or women, and a lot more just, you know, uncertainty about like what people want, like people trying to impress people trying to be cool. I think that's something that comes from women where it's like, I don't know. I think anyone who uses the phrase like, I want to take back the power when it comes to dating, like you're not mature enough to date. If you want power, go take a Taekwondo class or something. But you see that kind of thing a lot where it's like, you know, how can I, you know, get someone to like me more? And I think that is kind of going on with the younger generation where it's like, oh, like, I think he likes me. And, you know, your criteria for sleeping with someone should never be, it will make him like me more. What does he think it should be like? You know, I'm excited about this person and I feel like ready for this with this person. And I feel like that's not, like sometimes people think it's like a shortcut to getting someone to like them more or, you know, kind of progressing a relationship that maybe isn't going to happen.
Yeah, I can understand that. And that's one positive thing I would say about Tinks's box theory is that she also tags along with that it doesn't matter when you sleep with him, right?
Yeah, I think like from that perspective in terms of like, yeah, because you hear the stories of like people who, they met their boyfriend, like one of my closest friends met her boyfriend because she got lost at a music festival, and we said meet at the Flags at the Austin City Limits music festival, and only one guy showed up, and she was really upset because none of us met her at the Flags. They kind of hit it off, wandered off together, and they have been in a relationship ever since for like a year or so at this point. But kind of a one, like it was, you could say it was a stroke of luck or something like that, but he never said like, oh, you big hoe, like we're not, you're not girlfriend material. It was just, it kind of happened. And but you're kind of betting on like, if you're someone that can't handle sleeping with someone that early, and that would have been like a devastating experience for you, like there's some accountability there. I think, whatever reason in her gut, she knew that was the right call and it worked out, but there's kind of no guarantees. Like you don't really know this person yet. Like that's why it's kind of like, those dates, like you get to know that person. Like, what are you all about? Like, do you want to, have that intimate moment with this person because you like what they're about versus like, oh, they're cute. Like we'll see what happens. And then there's so much you don't know about them yet.
Right.
Yeah. And Emily and I seem to agree on this anyways, is that before a couple should go there kind of sexually, they should really kind of have a good fundamental understanding of who each other is. And that takes time.
Absolutely.
And, and I think that's the thing that where people get hurt a lot of times is that they rush into that. And that's something that has changed throughout time, where it's almost kind of expected, where it's probably what you probably did a chart on it, but like date 3 is like the expectation that sexuality comes into play on some level. And I just think that depending on the couple, it could take more than date 3. I would think date 3 is really early.
That is, yeah.
Because date 1 is like a meet and greet, basically.
I know. I think it depends on like how long you've been talking, potentially, or like how in depth maybe the first and second dates were. I don't know. Date 3 does sound early to me, even then. But I don't know. Like I think that ideally, like women shouldn't feel like they're being pressured early on, and hopefully that there's less of that, in the younger generation. Like I feel like in my generation there was still a little bit of that in the dating world. So it goes both ways, right? So women shouldn't feel like they need to put out early before they're comfortable with it, and then they also shouldn't feel bad for holding back until they're comfortable.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and I think there's always the joke about like, oh, it's date 3. Like if you go anywhere, like, oh, like what date is this? Oh, date 3. There's always the winking, the nudging, and stuff. Like I don't know where that comes from. Like I also think you can't just have all these dates in a silo. You've got to see people in like other comfortable like environments. I think this like go out to the coffee shop, to the bar or something. It's like you got to have something where it's like you meet their friends or you see them in other environments versus like 3 dates in a silo. That's just my take. Yeah, I don't know.
It's like couples want to, or I shouldn't even say couples because they're not really a couple yet, but it's like these two people want to find out if they have sexual chemistry first.
Yeah.
And then see if they want to then date.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work because I feel like you'll miss out on that potential sexual chemistry because you don't have the connections with each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the other thing is that I really believe that if you're really connecting emotionally, then the sex will kind of follow.
Yes.
It's not going to be like horrible sex if you have this really great bond. You know what I mean? Where the opposite could be true, which we've talked about on this podcast before, is that you could have great sex with someone that you have no compatibility with.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
So that ends up being a situationship, right? I'm learning all these new terms.
Yes,
so,
I would say that's
before you bash our terms like SMV and things like that, I've got it like, that's something that was never a term before. Probably, I don't know.
Totally. Like
it's very new.
Yeah, the post-nut clarity is that term that people use a lot lately. And it was interesting. Like I had someone DM me, a guy saying like, I really like this girl. We've, been dating a month of, dates and hanging out. And he's like, I'm so terrified of being this asshole who sleeps with her, and then what if I get this post-nut clarity and don't like her anymore? Like that's another thing too. I think so many guys are afraid of being assholes that they kindness their way into being an asshole, where they maybe just are almost too nice, where women like kind of miss the message they're giving. Like, like, oh, I'm not ready for a relationship right now, instead of saying like, hey, I'm not into you, like that kind of thing. But like that was a message I got, like this fear of like, oh my God, am I not going to be interested in her anymore? And I said like, if you're thinking about that, like already, like I'm sure like you will still like you will be fine. Like usually when that kind of thing happens, it's someone who just wasn't thinking about that at all. Probably because the woman sitting across from him didn't say like, hey, sex is a big deal to me. I firmly believe if you're a woman, you tell a guy like, hey, sex is a big deal. Like they'll listen. If you kind of casually go in and act like it's like not, then what else are they supposed to think? You're there doing it with them. Like they're going to assume it's just as casual as it is for them, unless you say otherwise.
Yeah, I think what happens a lot of times when guys are describing that, it's because of the fact that they really don't know the person that well. There's not that great of connection. They go there sexually, and then the sex isn't that great. And so they say to themselves, okay, I have clarity now that I don't want to go further with this person. But the reality is that if they would have gotten the opportunity to spend more time with them, then that sexual experience would probably be better. Because you don't really, especially people who hook up on the first date, like that's a big thing nowadays.
Yeah.
That you don't even know this person. And so how are you going to feel comfortable?
I always say, like, if you don't feel comfortable talking about sex, then you shouldn't be doing it. Like, you should be able to have a conversation about it. And I think most people don't do that.
But I just meant, I guess, in general, as far as having that connection where it just is it's a natural, normal, progression of that relationship versus it being forced because you guys are both drunk and, you're both attracted to each other. And then it ends up, kind of being lousy. And the guy wakes up and goes, I don't really want to, go there with her.
Then it's kind of ruined, right? Like he can't go back and then just try to build a connection.
It's hard.
Off of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because where's the motivation to?
Exactly. But, all the research shows, and it's just common sense, that when you have a really solid connection with somebody, then, like women are going to orgasm more. And so it's something, and for a guy, he's going to have a much better experience as well because he's going to feel like she's really into him, not, just going through the motions because, it was kind of the thing to do.
Yeah, there's some research out there showing that for one night stands, that only like 15% of women orgasm.
Yeah, it's so
like, holy
low.
Cow.
Yeah, and the guys it was like 50% or something like that, which I blew my mind.
Even that was low.
Like, it's all the alcohol, I think. Like, it's really like, and I think that's a challenge because it's like you want people to be social, like loosen up, get outside and meet people, but that usually involves a setting, with alcohol, and you have young people who are relatively new to drinking. You think you're 22, 23, you've drank for a year or two, like I don't know what they're drinking, like the vodka Red Bulls or something. But yeah, I think it leads to a lot of bad decisions. That's my DARE lesson that a lot of people probably already know.
But it seems to be more common now that that's happening more than ever.
Yeah, I think like, yeah, I think so. I think there's it has a lot to do with like kind of like modern technology as it's kind of brought people together in a way that it wouldn't have before, like just having kind of dating apps available and just people being able to, match with people like, hey, are you out tonight? Like having that kind of like shortcut that you wouldn't necessarily have had to have before. Like back in the day, it was like you're a guy, you want to approach somebody. It's like you kind of have to go up to somebody and, say, hey, this is me. But if nowadays it's like you have a match, oh, are you out tonight? Like it kind of has that shortcut of like attraction, like, oh, I know this person is single, I know they're kind of into me, like let's see what happens. Yeah, this
kind of phenomenon of kind of hooking up early is always been kind of going on to a certain degree in the college world, but I think it's starting to expand into adulthood, like post college. And so and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of relationships are not working. But also it's something where, so we really kind of, or I'll speak for myself, I, subscribe to this theory that there are a lot of guys on dating apps that are getting the majority of matches and they're, just running through women. I hate to say it that way, but I think that the combination of that and the fact that there's so many guys that are out of the dating market, or they're kind of on the fringes, it's something where I think that's really altered people's behavior towards dating in general. What's your take on that, Charlotte, as far as, kind of how dating apps and social media have kind of affected the dating market?
Oh gosh. So I think that looking at dating apps as like a kind of perspective of what dating is as a whole, I think it's kind of its own unique channel. I think it doesn't reflect, the right person you should date. And I think there's a certain, because I think people say a lot of times, 20% of like the top guys stand out. I think there's a certain type of person that stands out on the dating app. Like, I think, I've talked kind of in the past about like my marketing background, like people, right product, wrong audience. There's also kind of that like channel that you show yourself off and kind of show yourself off to the world to try to find people who like you back. People that tend to do well on the dating apps are people that are usually in opportunities where there's good photo ops, or they have a job or life situation where they're taking a lot of pictures of themselves. Like if you look at like the statistics of like the jobs that have the best matches, pilots are always number one. Why? Because probably they've got all these pictures of themselves, like, on a plane, like looking really cool in a uniform. And it's also a lot of other creatives who likely have a lot of other pictures, like, graphic designers, videographers, or it's like easily recognizable, successful jobs. So like everyone knows that a doctor's successful. Everyone knows that a lawyer's successful. So a certain type of person, I think, stands out. One of the reasons I didn't like them was because the type of guy I liked, like, never did well on there, in the sense that like guys don't really take a lot of pictures. Like if you think of like, I don't know, like I went to happy hour with my sister like last week, like we took a whole photo shoot because my hair looked good. Guys don't do that. That's why guys have so many fish pictures. They take pictures like at a time where they're like, oh, this is an accomplishment. I have my college diploma. They have 10 pictures of themselves total that are somewhat recent. Unless, you're a realtor and you're taking pictures in front of these fancy houses, then you might do well in the dating app. So I think like a certain type of guy based on the criteria that is asked for on a dating app do well. So like people that are in a job that's easily recognizable. Like I used to work in construction software. You would not believe the amount of people who are in construction in a really successful career, well over 100K salary, but people hear construction or a job title they're not familiar with, and they're just like, I don't know. Yeah. So I think it's like a certain type of guy with a certain type of profession with certain types of pictures does well, versus like kind of a top guy as a whole. Because I don't know, I think of like what my boyfriend's like dating app profile would have looked like. I know he's kind of talked about his like he didn't like being on dating apps, and I'm like, I bet you like I would have just swiped by it because it's just like I don't know, the type of guy I would see was just like campfire in front of it, like jeans, Levi's type guy, who didn't really stand out or like have a lot of like pictures of themselves. Like I'd rather just go to kind of like the campfire style bar and spot a person there in person.
That's very telling. That reminds me of the advice that we've given to guys to really get professional photos if you're going to be on dating apps. To do that, and then to highlight your career too. Like we've talked about, if you own a lawn care business, that you should put in there that you're, a business owner. Instead of just like you cut lawns, you do lawn care.
You're a landscaper.
Landscaper.
Business owner. Yeah, that type of thing.
Right.
So.
Because I think women do, it is that like shortcut to like, oh, this guy is stable and he has some amount of status. And they're flipping through the dating app so quickly that those key indicators are just a fast way to tell a lot within a story.
Oh, totally. I would never say, like, I don't know if this is a side note, like business owner, it sounds like so like multi-level marketing. I would say like president.
Oh, you think so?
If you own the business, like I would call yourself the president or founder. I would actually avoid founder,
I like
president, and I would avoid CEO because it sounds too like
douchey.
Or it sounds like just like entrepreneur fake. Like it sounds like, I don't know, like MLM status. And then like what I would do too, like get yourself like, and use this for your business too, kill two birds with one stone, like get like polo shirts for your landscaping outdoor business, like take a picture with those and then you'll have it for your website. Like give yourself a cool title because you own the business. And then that way when people Google you too, they'll find like, oh, whoa, he owns a successful landscaping company. Yeah. Like do something like that. Or like if you have in front of your office, like the big check, like that people always do, like if you, I don't know, like their first dollar or something that like shows off your business. Like I would do that. I also think like as a whole on a dating app, like I forget what person it was, but like think like Barbie and Ken, like how Barbie has like beach Barbie or like professional work Barbie. Like think of like yourself in all these different scenarios, like 6 different good scenarios, like, one workout picture or outdoorsy picture doing a hobby, like, one professional. Like if you're a guy, also, if you go to a wedding and you are a guy, like get those pictures, like get the pictures that the photographer took, and like don't let the bride like hide those from you, because those always make great dating app pictures. And women, of course, are thinking like, oh, that's what he'll look like that day. So
sure. Well, they're going to be professional photographs, and the guy's most likely probably going to be in a suit.
Yes.
And he's going to be have a smile on his face because he's having a good time. And so, kind of shows that social proof as well.
Yeah,
that he has friends. And
he'll be with his friends too.
Yes.
Yeah.
because we've spoken about this, that no woman likes loners. That's kind of scary to them.
Yes.
So if you have at least one photograph of you and your friends, now I think can't be too many, because then you can't distinguish between who's who. But yeah, I think coming from your marketing background, essentially what you're saying is like market yourself like you would a business.
Sell yourself. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, right product, wrong audience. Sometimes it's, make some improvements to the product to make it better, but don't go and say like, everything's wrong with it. We're going to do something different, like being the best version of yourself versus changing everything. And then, some people are just dating app people. Some people aren't. I never was. Like, I think I have a strong personality that often I would get frustrated because I would feel like I would get to like date 2 or 3 just myself, and I would just feel like my personality kind of came out of its shell, and it would feel like, oh, this person like lost interest in me because and I felt like it was just wasted waste of time. I was like, I wish they knew this about me like up front. So I always felt like in person like worked better for me, or like ways that people would know what they were getting themselves into versus like, oh, a pretty picture, and then they find out like a few dates down the road. So I think some people, it's like, you have a good group of friends, maybe it's the warmer connections. Sometimes like people do really well with kind of those like colder approaches. Like it's like certain people and types of people do better with certain ways to meet other people, I would say.
So the other thing we've always recommended, which is really difficult, is the best way to meet a person is in a warm environment. But the problem is that the warm environments are kind of disappearing. And so what, recommendations would you give as far as, let's say you're an average guy out there, and let's say you don't, if you do have friends, because, a lot of guys really don't even have any friends nowadays, especially younger guys. And if they do, they don't have, their friends are single as well. So it's not a really good situation for having a dinner party. So what would you recommend as far as either building up a warm environment, or, just for guys out there being able to kind of connect more with other guys?
Yeah, I think, just kind of that loss of the third space that we're just seeing as a whole. Like you think of like COVID, you think of everything being online. Like even back in the day, the more introverted guy who liked video games in the 80s, what would they do? They'd go to the arcade. Even in the 90s, they would go to each other's houses. Now it's all online. So that loss of that space, after work, after school, like a place that's not home or work or school, like bringing that back in every way you can, I think is super, super important. I think for, kind of the average guy, and I live in Austin. When I moved to Austin, would see a lot of people making that same move. Like, people recently out of college, people maybe early, mid-20s, coming from a smaller town. I think that was just, the growth and change I would see from the guys that would do that. Like just even the look, like over the course of a year, how they went from kind of having like a small town Midwest look to all of a sudden being like very, very good at dressing, like was just crazy. So what I would say, I think for guys, like if you can move to a city that is fun or a good environment, I think that's a great idea. I know that might, I don't want to sound like elitist or anything, or I know that's not realistic for everybody, but guy in your early mid-20s, like really consider maybe doing that. I think if the idea of just big cities sounds scary, like a New York or an LA or a Chicago, like tier 2 cities, I think is what people will call them, but like an Austin, a Denver, Tampa, cities like that, where it's I've heard great things about Charlotte, North Carolina, like cities that are have that smaller element, more diversity in the sense that they're not kind of swaying one specific opinion or the other. Like you can kind of meet a wide range of people. I think is really huge. If you move there, I would suggest going to one of those apartment complexes that are like a mid-rise that is, you'll know it when you see it on a website, like just apartments that have like the pool, the game room. A lot of them, they're that are really reasonably priced. Like you don't have to get like the high rise in the middle of the city, but they'll have things like gatherings for residents, ways to meet people that way. It's also just like a good kind of place to congregate if you ever want to have people over ahead of time, of like an event or something, just being able to have people over and like have fun that way. Another suggestion I would have in that regard, if you're not by yourself, is just banding together with a few guy friends, just as you have them. Like, I think there's strength in numbers. Like, even if you have just a group of 3 single guys, like, that's, I think, huge as far as like, you're 3 people. I think that feels a bit safer to women. Like, okay, he has friends, like people like him. He's not the weirdo walking around, but you get that like, the nice like 3-bedroom apartment. Like sometimes it's affordable to get like a penthouse, like sometimes not, but just those like kind of big floor model. And you can like kind of on Fridays, whether it's like a party or like like we used to have like pre-games back in the day, but that's a way to like keep things like organized in a sense where it's like not just this big party, but like, oh, there's a concert going on tonight. Everyone meet here at 6, concert starts at 7, we'll all caravan together. And that's just a great way to like meet new people. Just do it in a way that doesn't feel like exclusive or restrictive, and just be the guys with the cool apartment. And that doesn't mean you have to like show off, or that's not in the sense of like be the richest guy in the room. It's just be a fun place for people to go. And I think also if you're a guy looking for something a bit more casual, I think it sets the tone for that as well. Because sometimes when you go on the dating app, it implies like ready for a relationship. I think having those kind of casual vibes, if you're younger, you aren't necessarily ready for a relationship, it sets the tone for that as well. So that's kind of the move to a new city kind of vibe.
When Emily and I were speaking yesterday, that's exactly kind of what we came up with.
We did. Yeah. We were talking about how ideally, especially if you are in your 20s or 30s, like young professional, you're out of college, to go to a city that is ideal.
Yeah.
Now,
You don't even have to be professional. Like if you're
Right,
working construction or you have a trade, that can be and we actually pulled up a list of the best cities for guys, and essentially why that was is because there's the ratio is there's more single women than there are guys. So like Baltimore was number 1. I can look at the list right now.
Yeah, we should read them off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they weren't like the standard biggest cities. They weren't like New York City or Miami.
Yeah. So
Right.
it was just to list off the top 10 was Baltimore was number 1. Philadelphia was number 2. Washington, D.C. was number 3. New York, number 4. Boston, number 5. Nashville, number 6. Detroit, 7. Fort Worth, 8. Oakland, 9. And then Cleveland, 10. And then Omaha, Nebraska was 11.
No.
So, but yeah, Charlotte, North Carolina is on there. It's at 13. So I think, and they were basing these factors on not just the fact of the male to female ratio, but age, demographics, and also cost of living for the city, all those different types of variables. So I think that for guys, especially living in small to mid-sized cities where there's not going to be a lot of warm environments, if you go to a bigger city, you're going to find those. Because, like, for example, here, we just don't have a lot of those warm environments. So if I was talking to a young guy, I would say, really consider moving to a bigger city. And I think that getting an apartment like that, and, even if it's with a couple of coworkers, if, because guys tend to, on the most part, work in kind of male-dominated professions. I know that's, eye-opening, but so if they're working in construction or if they're working in tech or whatever it is, then, maybe start some of those friendships at work.
Yes.
And kind of say, hey, let's just grab a beer after work.
That's
right?
a good way to go about it. But I'm thinking for myself, like if I was single and potentially moving to a new area where I don't even know anyone yet, like what do you think is the best approach? Because how do you actually know people then to roommate with?
So I think if you're kind of choosing from scratch, like where should I move? I think like don't make it too hard for yourself, but obviously look at the cities you could be interested in, but kind of either go adjacent from something you're already at. Like if you're living in a suburb or something and there's the big major city and you like that city, that wasn't it for me. Like I grew up like north of LA. Like I would never move to LA. Austin was great. But kind of looking at, what is adjacent, if that's open to you, or if you're open to that. Or like consider like where you have friends or connections. Like, do you have the cool cousin that's living in a specific city who always has really cool Instagram stories? Like consider where, friends live. I think just a luxury we have with kind of the remote environments is maybe do like an Airbnb for like a week. If you're kind of narrowing it down between cities, like, live there and work there from that Airbnb as though you're living there and see how you like it. Kind of give each city a trial run. I would say to do that. Or just, like kind of looking at what your interests are as well. Like if you don't like to ski, don't go to Denver, but consider, your hobbies or interests. Like, I don't know, Austin just opened Joe Rogan's Comedy Mothership Club. Huge opportunity if you're into stand-up comedy as a performer, or if you like to watch it, it's a great new place to go. Like, consider that kind of thing. Like Nashville, you like country music, that kind of stuff. Consider where your interests are, is what I would say.
Sure. Yeah, and once you're there, I would say, if you have the opportunity to have work colleagues, that would probably be the first stop. But the other thing I was thinking of, kind of piggybacking on what Charlotte said, is if you're going to get roommates, maybe go on, as people still use Craigslist, or something like that in order
There
to.
probably is something out
Facebook
there.
Marketplace.
Yeah, Facebook Marketplace is big now. So use that in order to potentially, get a roommate that would be a good fit for you, or roommates. And then you kind of have a built-in group of friends that potentially guys that move there from other cities as well.
Definitely. And I think if you're a shy guy, like look for the cool guy. I think it's really cool when groups of guys, like they each kind of play a different role. Like I would tell a guy, if you're shy and you have a group of fun friends, always play the role of a DJ at a party. All you're doing is pressing play, but everyone thinks you're working magic, and women will just come up to you and they'll want to talk, oh, play my song. But kind of having those like fun groups of people that break you out of your shell or make up for maybe what you lack. Like if you struggle with, kind of motivation to go outside, like you're more of an introvert, if you get that like extrovert roommate, I think it can also like help level out that person as well. Like you keep that person in check, and you kind of become this like group of, like best buddies, like kind of like Hangover style, like that movie where they all kind of get together and look out for each other. Like healthy male friendships, I think, are just one of the biggest green flags like that I've seen in guys.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I would say in today's day and age, they're less and less. So I do think that it has to do with taking the effort to find, other guys, and definitely putting yourself into situations like that where you could possibly roommate with them and have a variety of types of friends. I totally agree with that, including like relationship status. So don't just look for the guys that are single, like be friends with the guys that are in relationships, because that's expanding your social circle.
Absolutely.
And then, his girlfriend is going to have female friends that she'll bring around.
Yes, that is the best way to go. And I think kind of choosing a diverse mix of like groups to join, like Meetup, the app is like really good for, finding just different interests that are maybe a bit more casual. But consider like, what's a good professional organization? You're in construction, the Association of General Contractors that meets on Thursdays. Yeah, there might be a bunch of old guys there, but it's a good way to kind of kill two birds with one stone. Like, oh, maybe you meet someone nice that lives on the other side of town. I think if you're a guy who especially if you're working with, a primarily male-dominated industry, when you choose what you want to do for working out, like maybe choose the co-ed CrossFit class versus kind of putting your headphones on and going in the corner of the gym, like stuff that's social, like as much as you can, especially when you're in a new city. And the cool thing about when you're in one of these cities, everyone's a transplant, everyone's trying to make friends. You're not the weirdo. I think looking at all of those perspectives, if you're religious, like, find a church you like, if you don't like one, try another. Just putting yourself out there and like finding those like third spaces, I think is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, that's the message we try to send as much as possible, is just get out of the damn house.
Yes.
And it can be really daunting for people, I think, nowadays, especially for younger guys. But, our kind of main demographic is between 25 and 35-year-olds, mostly men. I would say 95% men in that age range. And so I'm wondering, because that's kind of skews things a little bit, because by the time someone is 30, they're most likely in a career. So it might be a little bit more difficult to move then. The other thing too is that, like you said, it's a challenging prospect depending on what your life situation is. Because let's say you live in a smaller town, but all of your friends live there. Yet you have to give them up, and your family lives there. But I think it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're really looking for a long-term relationship and potential marriage and family, then I think you have to make those hard decisions and move to where people are.
Yeah, I think first, if it's something where you're close to family, unless there's someone that needs you to take care of them, you can always move home. That was what I told myself when I moved to Austin. So I think there's something beautiful about that. Your friends will love to have that big city to visit in, like the friends from home. One thing I have noticed, like with guys who have reached out to me, is there are some careers that put you in a situation that you can't really move out from wherever you're at. Like I think, what does he do? He's something with like veterinary, like if you think of like farmer reps, but he does that for farm animals, so he has to live in a remote area. He said, I don't see women or people really for days. Like, what do I do? So I think those are situations where it's like, if you have a career that keeps you kind of in a strange, in an obscure location where it's hard to meet people, that maybe isn't an option. I think with those, I think a good option is looking into like digital alternatives that are not necessarily dating apps. I think, joining things like Facebook groups for specific interests. Like if you have a certain interest in a hobby, like getting to be a part of those groups. I know there's like Facebook. If you are on TikTok, that is a great way to meet people, actually. Like if you have a hobby or an interest, like document it and follow people who do the same things, like make connections that way, like kind of avoid like dating apps, but just use like digital communities. And then obviously try to find opportunities to travel wherever you can. Like if you're in a situation where you can't move, there's no people, look to like those like digital kind of replications of what you're missing out on if you're not in a big city.
Yeah, and it's all about networking, right? At the end of the day, whether it's in person or on a digital space, but getting to the point where you're comfortable in reaching out to people and asking people, hey, do you want to hang out, or do you want to do this or that? And sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes it's not, but you won't know unless you try. And so it's really kind of putting that effort into it. Kind of like Emily was saying, and you were as well. So
it does take that effort. And I wonder if Gen Z is actually better at that versus like, I feel like as a millennial, I feel like there's still a certain level of like oddity in connecting with people through social media. Like in a solid way.
So I think they're totally there is like an awkwardness. I think like once you break past it in the right way, or you can kind of like subtly hint at it. Like people will talk about, you go on Instagram and you like a bunch of the pictures versus you do a sales pitch of yourself. It's like, oh, here's my subtle indicator, or like kind of doing those little like soft steps to see how things work. I think like those can always be like a way to say like, okay, like they didn't hate this, like okay, let's try see what's next, or they freak out, like then that's not it. But there's always like soft signals. I think when people talk about like cold approaching or approaching people, they think you have to go up and like pour your heart out. It's like, no, there's soft
just
things.
Introduce
like,
yourself. Say
exactly.
hello.
Well, I think a better method is if you're at a bar, like, oh, what are you drinking? If they say vodka soda, period, and turn away, that's a no. If they say vodka soda, what about you? You have a conversation started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've always said that to guys, is that if a woman has any interest in you at all, she'll make it easy for you.
Yep.
But if she doesn't, then there's nothing really you can do to turn that around.
Yeah. We have talked about that, and we've argued that, kind of against game.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people out there and a lot of creators that think that game can overcome anything. So if you have a good enough comeback to a statement like that, like even when it's a pretty clear rejection, that you might be able to get her to turn around, and actually get her to the point where she's back to being interested.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree with the, you can't really do much of anything if you're a clear no to her.
Yeah, just move on to the next person.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Because you don't, when it comes to game, like, the reason I don't like that term, that word, is because it just seems very manipulative.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? So versus just not being blue pilled and saying be yourself, but be the best version of yourself and be witty and have good banter and things of that nature. Just try to be comfortable and don't be outcome based. Be process based. So saying, I want to have a conversation with this woman and I want it to go well because I'm comfortable and I'm able to express myself. And if I end up getting her number out of the whole thing, awesome. If not, I practiced. It was, it wasn't a big deal. And so just to get more comfortable in that process versus having specific tactics that you do. Although like that tactic you just, put out there, that's really simple, but effective.
Yeah, I think if approaching people is scary enough as it is, like do things that make it easier for yourself. Like you don't have to go out and run into traffic. It's like, oh, you can get your foot wet. What are you drinking? Vodka soda is a good way. Those kinds of like short, like kind of little like get your feet wet things, I think are kind of the way to go. But I wouldn't even say those are just tactics as much as just like opening up and being friendly with people and just trying to like broaden your horizons.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that can potentially lead to a lot of positive interactions, and it just gives guys confidence to be able to say they got through it and they didn't die in the process. Because for guys, so we read an interesting stat recently from a Pew study that said 80% of guys right now are not comfortable in approaching at all, just because, of social media showing the nightmares that happen with like a lot of gym, videos and things like that guys are getting labeled as creeps. And, that's the last thing any guy wants to ever be labeled as. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. Like there's so many mixed messages now too. Like back in the day, like, if a guy was interested in someone, needed some advice, who would he go to? An older brother, someone who knew him, knew his environment, like had an interest in helping him, like, no financial gain or anything. You go on TikTok, there's someone who's, got money to make off of, you being upset so that you keep watching their content, or, that you buy their coaching stuff and whatnot. Or it's like you go and you see someone's story about how a guy was creepy, and then, but also like women want a man to chase because high value stuff. And it's there's so many mixed messages right now. And it sucks because it's like a guy, I think, will choose not being a creep over, potentially being the guy who chased, because no one wants to be labeled a creep. It's like, it's so frustrating, like that amount of like mixed messages. And so many of it comes from people who are, various different ages from you. Like back in the day, you would hear from people similar age range, similar environment, demographics, where you can kind of trust that information a bit more. Now you're hearing it from people across the country where things maybe look a little bit different. Like the people in Miami date a lot differently than people in a small town. And they probably have some different advice on how to approach people and who to talk to. So just the mixed messages is really kind of frustrating. But that's where I think those kind of like soft things versus, the approach. Like if you say, like, what are you drinking? Like, it's hard to be labeled a creep for that. I also think like whatever you do, like if someone said it back to another person, like, he asked me what I'm drinking, and someone else would just be like, that's normal. It's fair game. Like, it's like if someone just like,
you're at a social place, people are going to interact.
Exactly. And it makes them look like the crazy person who's being stuck up. Like if you just think of like, what would it sound like if this person relayed this story to their friends? Like, what would other people think? Like, I would say that that's fair game. Like, what are they going to say? Oh, he came up and asked what I'm drinking. Like, okay, like it's a bar. Like, like even this most stuck up girl, like all her friends would be like, okay, like it's normal. Like, you didn't like it, move on. Like, so I do think it's safe, but the mixed messages, like if you're a younger guy, like new to dating, like I can only imagine it's just difficult.
Yeah, and I think the bar situation, like that does make it easier compared to if you're out and definitely on the street or at like the library or just somewhere where it's not as social, the park. Yeah, I feel like there might be more holdback from a man because he is afraid of like just saying anything. Yeah. But I think there is probably a way to just say, hey, I'm so-and-so. Or, if she's walking a dog, like, hey, like, he's really cute. What kind of dog is this? What kind of breed is it? Or just something to point out.
If you are a guy who likes dogs, I think it is a great, it's great for your mental health. I have a dog. It's great for your own mental health, for your own fitness. Like my dog Dolly gets me out of the house for 2-mile runs, like really regularly. And it's great for me. The dog park is a great place to meet people. It is a conversation starter that just happens organically, like whether you like it or not. And yeah, it's also just huge. All dogs need to be adopted. If you're not sure what you want to do, like foster through your like local animal shelter. I would say that's huge for any guy who's looking to meet someone. Looking for connections. Meaning, a dog will make you a lot of friends.
It's these like simple things and simple suggestions that I think guys should pay attention to, and not so much the creators that are online bashing a guy because of a bad date, because of some specific nitty-gritty thing that he did, or said. But I think that you're right. You hit the nail on the head as far as the amount of information that's coming into them. And like, they're already so logical and overthinkers typically that'll hold them back even further. It's like overthinking the conversation before you go and approach a girl. Like, you're going to get yourself too nervous and you're going to be so afraid of making the wrong move that you're not going to do it.
Totally. And I wouldn't trust any of the like TikTok dating storytellers and whatnot. Like, there are people out there, like I think there was a New York Times, but if you remember, like last year there was like that West Elm Caleb
Yes.
debacle.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! But there is money to be made or clout to be gained from telling your bad date stories and the celebrity status that kind of comes from that. The woman who broke that story no longer, she's an influencer full time because of that story.
Wow.
And so
That's
there's an
wild.
incentive to tell these stories. But at the same time, they don't reflect the average woman. Like, I think a lot of
No.
other women look to that and they I don't like one reason, like I was kind of cautious about TikTok stuff is I was like, are my friends going to think this is cringy? Like, am I going to hear from, would this affect my dating life or something like that? So like a lot of like women don't want to do that kind of niche and whatnot. But yeah, like if you see women on TikTok with those hundreds of thousands of views and likes, like it doesn't reflect the everyday woman. Like I wouldn't be surprised if
Yes.
those stories are fake or, she's being self-destructive because she's looking for a story over a real connection.
Or she like already didn't like him. And
Yeah.
then all those things like she had to logically think of and highlight and probably exaggerate. So, you can't, I think it's so true that when a woman likes a guy, like it's really hard for him to mess it up. So these little things, like even if that same guy did those things with a woman that likes him, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, it's a good segue into our next topic, potentially. And I did this for, I didn't wear my Henley intentionally for you, Charlotte, because I wanted to
noticed
make you
that.
comfortable.
Oh, stop
But
that.
we're going to talk a little bit about the thing that really kind of is bothersome to me nowadays. I'm seeing this on social media a lot, is the whole ick phenomenon.
Oh my goodness.
And so can you talk a little bit about that and help me out with this? Because
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time with it.
Yeah, and so I think first the definition of ick it's really all over the map. When I first heard the term ick probably a year or two ago, it was something that kind of made sense, like described as being, this moment in time you're dating someone for how long, everything's going great, you think you're attracted to them, and then there's a moment in time where that person does something kind of small, minuscule, and you lose attraction to them. And usually that thing, it's not something that would be like a universally known turn off. It's not like you introduced them to your parents and they were rude and you were turned off. It's like they hopped over a puddle in a funny way, or they, they raised their hand with, 3 fingers instead of 1 when they were looking for the check, or they whistled funny. And all of a sudden you just lose all attraction to them. And it's this unexplainable feeling and there's no going back from it. And that's kind of like what my perception of the ick was. It's not something you're expecting to have happen. It's something I haven't I think most, when you look at icks that way, it's something that happens kind of, you can count on your hand. And the most rational, because it's obviously a weird phenomenon, the most rational explanation I heard is, your subconscious mind knows something that your rational mind doesn't, and it's telling you this person's not the match. This kind of, you don't have this tangible reason to not like them. Maybe they're good on paper, but, for some reason, like, this little thing they did made you just so turned off and you don't want to talk to them anymore. And I think that kind of, like, the last time I remember having it, I was recently out of a relationship, starting to go on dates again. And I forget what it was. This guy, he said it was like, I feel like I'm just like Jeff Bezos. And it was something kind of goofy. And it was just all of a sudden it hit me. And in the moment I didn't know about it. Like, and then when I look back, I was kind of like, oh, like I wasn't ready to date again. And that's kind of my example of an ick. Like, just that feeling of like, you could, because everything about this person was great on paper. He was a friend of a friend. Like, why wouldn't I like him? And I think that's probably a reason why women describe this phenomenon a bit more, because I think women sometimes convince ourselves to go on dates a bit more. Like, if someone says, hey, I want you to meet my friend so-and-so, go on a date with him. Like, how many times, if you're a woman, you're like, I don't know. Like, the friend says, oh, but he's nice. Like, you just give it a shot. I think like that's a pressure women put on other women. Like, women, they count years and ages and stuff, and like, oh, like this person likes him. Like, maybe there's something about his personality that I don't know yet. I think if a man says, I'm not into this person, people will trust that answer and say, okay, cool. You don't go on this date with this person. So I think that is where it comes from. But where I hear this like kind of new explanation is it's sort of become this catch-all for just like bizarre turnoffs, and like girls going on TikTok with their lists and going like, my icks are whatever. And I firmly believe like an ick is like that weird moment in time that's not, in general, like it's not like I'm all of a sudden unattracted to guys who say I'm like Jeff Bezos or something like that. It's like that one specific moment. But yeah, it's become this odd catch-all that I can't really like I'm just like, it's become this catch-all for like weird turnoffs. And I think people, I don't know, you make a video about icks on TikTok and like it'll just like blow up and whatnot. So I think it's like more humor than anything, unfortunately. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Okay. So do you think it's a real phenomenon, or do you think that, like for example, like with the women who go on TikTok and make lists, that's something that they're doing to be funny or just to, potentially gain clout or something?
Yeah, I think it's a bit more of that. I also think some of the things they're saying are kind of goofy little things that aren't necessarily like making them lose all attraction to someone. Like maybe they're saying like, oh, this time he did this, he looked kind of goofy. Like, because I mean, anyone who, someone says their ick is they chased a bus or something, they late to the bus and they were chasing it. Like everyone looks goofy when they're doing that. Like, you're not going to permanently be the guy who's running around chasing the bus. Like, sometimes I've heard it used too as this almost like coping mechanism. Like if you're a guy's kind of like broken your heart, like you were into a guy, he's not into you, like just picture him doing this like dumb thing and maybe it'll make you like him less. I've heard that one too. And I mean, whatever helps you get over someone, as long as you're not calling them up and like being mean to them. Like, I mean, if it helps you to think like, oh, like I thought about him, raising his hand and doing a silly dance and that makes you, move on, more power to you. But that's like another scenario I've heard it used. But it's become a catch-all for like turn-offs and like goofy things people do. But in the purest form, it's like that moment in time you lose attraction. I firmly believe like that version is something women can count on like one hand.
And I feel like it cannot happen once you've already been dating somebody for like a long period of time. I don't know. At least I've never experienced that. Do you agree or disagree? Because it's like a sudden loss. Like how do you suddenly lose attraction if you've been
for the entirety
on, like,
of that person?
Right. If you've been like dating for a month, like I guess that has never happened to me, so I don't see how that aligns.
Yeah, and I think like usually it's like when you're in that at that point, it's like it's more of like the regular turn off things. Like it's like I had someone where the way the impression they left on my parents, like just I really didn't like it. Like, but that's a turn off. That's not an ick. That's like and that was something that happened later. Like I don't know, my boyfriend describes a situation where he was kind of like done, or just it was the end of the rope with the relationship where it was like she ate her chips really funny, which is interesting to hear that coming from a guy. But I think it was one of those like he's so nice, and I think he like he didn't want to like walk away from a good thing or something. But like that's the only scenario I've heard it come up later, which is interesting.
That's a good point, because it's almost like once you're out of the honeymoon phase, potentially. I mean, those things do pop up in a relationship where you find these little annoyances. I would almost call them more like that. But maybe it's more like an ick if there's other issues underlying in the relationship and you're not really a good match for each other. And then those things are just getting highlighted as icks. But that's not really why you're losing feelings.
I think that it's so toxic, though, to even speak about these, because what happens is that then guys watch this or read this, and then they're like walking on eggshells.
No,
because
totally.
because they can't screw up anything. If they do, then it's going to be a turnoff to this woman, and they're never going to get another chance. And so I think, especially when it becomes a meme, when they have a list of 30.
Think about if guys had icks that they talked about.
Yeah.
Like women would flip out.
Well, I think there is some reality to this, because I think women have a higher disgust response than men. So, that's why guys can live like pigs and be okay with it. Where women, even young women, typically, if you look in like dormitories, like they're much cleaner.
Yeah.
And so I think for guys, a lot of times our brains work that if it's something that is a little nuisance or annoyance or whatever, if he's attracted to her overall, they'll just kind of push that to the side. But I think with women, especially if they have an abundance of options, which is kind of what's happening in today's dating world versus most guys, then they can afford to kind of act on that. Because then, they can always next somebody and then, have a date the next day if they really wanted to.
Right. Yeah, they could see that the grass is greener potentially very quickly.
Yes. Or they might just discover another ick.
Yeah.
So, but I'm wondering how much you guys think that the current dating market is adding to something like this versus if it was, 20 years ago, for example, maybe.
Well, I agree. And what you just said with like women have those quick options, they can just get on a dating app and get so many matches that they know that. And so if something does drive them away from the relationship, whether it's something as silly as being labeled an ick or like an actual real relationship dilemma, an argument, maybe they're not working well together, instead of sitting in that discomfort and having those uncomfortable conversations, it's easy for them to just potentially end the relationship, or even before ending the relationship, look and see what other options there are, and like testing the waters, which is terrible. But I think that is out there. And maybe it's not as clear as getting on a dating app, because that's pretty bad when you're in a relationship. But it could just be that they're on their Instagram, they're on their social media and they accept the DM, or they read the DM, they reply to the DM. It's like that little tiny step that doesn't have much barrier to it. That's what I'm seeing change, I would say, in the last 20 to 10 years, is that it's just so easy to kind of open that door that it's impacting relationships.
I think like, as a whole, just kind of knowing what everyone else is doing at any given time, like beyond the dating apps, like just having Instagram to open and just, see what everyone else is doing and just knowing what's going on outside of wherever it is you're at. I think that plays a huge role in kind of like culture for young people as a whole, in a, like, when dating's part of that. Like if you think of, I don't know, like if I threw a barbecue on a Saturday and said, hey, like everyone, like I'm throwing this barbecue, who wants to come? Like the response I would get from a lot of my friends would be something like, I'll try and stop by. Everyone almost like, it's almost like everyone acts as though their favorite band is going to come to town and play a surprise concert in their backyard.
They can't say yes. They can't give you a definite answer.
And if they say yes, like it just means like they will not be. That
would drive me crazy.
It drives me crazy.
I don't live in Austin.
And I think and I think it's just part of that. Like it's like you see everything else everyone else is doing, like what, like people that you would have never been exposed to as a whole, like that. So just this feeling like, oh, like I'll be fine. I have other options, or there's something else out there. Is just something that you're seeing a lot more than you would have. Like just what's going on this weekend, like not firmly committing to anything. And it's you see that with dating, I think, as well. Like yeah,
and that's a newer phenomenon for sure. So I don't know, what advice would you give to guys? We can see this on our comments all the time, but I'm going to push back at our comment section right now, because the one comment I see on a regular basis is never ask a fish how to catch you. But I disagree with that, because I think that I know you guys personally, and I know that when it comes, especially Emily, because she advocates for men, that you guys have good intentions when you are sending those messages. So what advice would you give to guys who are kind of feeling overwhelmed with the kind of market right now and their lack of options? And I know that's kind of a broad question, but as far as, so we just talked about icks. So like one of the things I would recommend real quickly is just like, you can't even worry about that. You can't focus on that, because then all that will do is create anxiety within yourself. And then you're more likely to then create something that is an ick potentially.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, for interactions, for just being more confident, what are some things that a guy could do that would be helpful for that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is regaining your confidence, especially if you're out of like a broken relationship. So I think taking the time to work on yourself absolutely is important. And you probably haven't been taking care of yourself in that prior relationship, most likely, if it was breaking down. And I think I heard this one recommendation, which I think is true, is that like the duration of your last relationship, you should spend like a quarter to half of that same amount of time just being single.
Yeah.
And so just giving yourself that. I can say from a personal standpoint that I did not do that. That was like, I wouldn't say that I have any regrets, but it definitely made my journey harder. And it's better. You're going to be better off if you can just force yourself to do that. Set that time period and set goals for yourself and just work on that and do hard things, because I think that's really what builds true confidence. And then the only other thing that I will say that we've talked about before is be careful about the content that you're consuming. Like I get that. Like I've heard guys say that for sure. Like don't ask women, what they want, because they don't know what they want.
Exactly.
I don't think that's necessarily true. Like I think that you should have a balanced approach when it comes to the content creators that you're following. So a mix obviously, if you're talking about dating, like you should have a mix of women content creators and male content creators that, especially if they're validating to you, you know, and you feel like it's very relatable, then you know that they're going to have a perspective that you can take in and that you're going to be comfortable with. And that hopefully then like push your boundaries a little bit so that you can kind of change, because most likely you're going to need to if you haven't been in the dating world in a while. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that's really one of the points that you made as far as content creators. That's really important because I think the thing with content creators, just a real quick aside, is that a lot of them are very intelligent. Like Myron from Fresh and Fit is a really smart guy. Doesn't mean what he's saying is correct, though.
Oh, yeah. And they can totally be valid. And the points that they're bringing up, like they're real issues, solid issues. But their solutions to those issues are toxic. They're terrible.
Yeah. Just be that 10% man or whatever. Where the reality is that, most guys aren't going to be millionaires and, have huge Instagram following.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's the thing as far as saying, okay, like Andrew Tate says some things that actually make sense, but then his solutions are awful.
Yes.
And so it's something that for younger guys, picking your creators wisely, I think is really good advice. How about you, Charlotte? What are some thoughts you have?
Yeah, and I think with any kind of influencer or creator, like they feel like you're friends in a way that like a celebrity from 10 years ago wouldn't. Like if you think back to, whatever you saw in Bravo, like the reality TV shows, the influencer culture is a lot different now where they talk to you like on the camera, you see their day-to-day lives and they feel like you're friends, but they are looking to make some sort of like money off you. A lot of their advice, like, sometimes it's something that sounds really good on a t-shirt and they make a t-shirt for it, or they have some sort of a course. So that they're trying to sell you.
That's for me, every time I hear somebody's course, grift.
Yeah.
That's what I think of. And so it's something that, especially when it comes to game, but sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
Totally. No, but totally. Like, it's like, take it with a grain of salt, see it as entertainment. But I really think the best people for advice are people in your own community, like that understand you and have no financial gain from your success and, only seek to see you happy. So if you have the cool older cousin, cool older sibling, the cool guy at work that you go and grab a coffee with, like finding those friendships, I think is huge. And then kind of expanding from that, leaning into friendships or other social situations. Like I think a lot of guys where it's like, go work on yourself, they go into like monk mode where it's like they want to go read a bunch of books in their house by themselves or get a six pack and then just reemerge when they're this like ethereal being. It's kind of like mix something social into that. Like I think I said before, where it's like go to the co-ed CrossFit class as a group. Yeah. And I think, that's not just like, to meet women directly from that. It's like, when someone has the barbecue for the CrossFit group and people invite their friends, like great way to meet people. Or if you're just interacting with women that way, it's like then the woman you see at the grocery store isn't so scary. So it's just a way to like lean into yourself and then friendships on top of that. So that way when you're ready to date, like you have this good foundation of places to kind of go and look from there.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. It's really nuanced because, I have said on this podcast myself that certain individuals should go into monk mode before they're ready to date. But I'm kind of stepping back on that a little bit now. And I think what I'm saying at this point is kind of more in combination with what you just said, as far as I think you can do both simultaneously. So you can, work out, for example, and not necessarily put yourself on a dating app or actively seek to date. But, maybe CrossFit's not your thing, but there's something else out there that's a running group or whatever that you can get into and make friends while you're self-improving.
Exactly.
Yeah, I almost like agree and I disagree.
Okay.
And this is where I stand with it because I think it depends. Like if you were in a relationship that broke down and you're dealing with that, I think that what a lot of people will do, especially when they're young, is if they were like really heartbroken and it was very difficult, is that they will potentially cope with going out all the time. And they will surround themselves with people all of the time. Yes. And they're not sitting in their feelings at all. And they're probably consuming alcohol. They're probably doing these other things that are just helping them cope. So it is all about that really healthy balance. It's about like going into a little bit of monk mode and being comfortable with yourself by yourself without those other substances to get you along. And then also I think finding like a couple of people that you really can kind of spend individual time with. And because I know myself, like one of my good friends, her, and then I would say one of my cousins, absolutely. Like I couldn't imagine going through the time period that I did without them, healing like post-separation. And instead, like if I was in a big group, because I did have a big group of friends too, and if I was just like hanging out with them all the time, it would not have been the same as like just spending
You wouldn't have been able
one-on-one
to agree
time.
that you would have been medicating yourself,
Right.
with going out or
Right.
alcohol or whatever.
So it kind of
may be.
depends. Like, and you still want to have those fun times, like I still definitely balanced it out once in a while, but it's all about the balance. And I think it's about how heartbroken you were, because if we're just talking about a 2-month relationship, probably not a big deal. You can just hang out with your friends as usual.
Yeah, sure.
Totally. I think like the organized groups kind of give that safety net. Like if you do a organized CrossFit class, like there's not going to be like alcohol there.
Yeah.
Like volunteering and like charity groups are awesome for, those types of connections. Like, I don't know, like a Big Brothers, Big Sisters is awesome. Like just being able to like be a mentor for someone in your community and then having those connections with people that are doing like the same type of work that you're doing, like doing something like that gives you meaning, but is social without like kind of that disorganized like alcohol. Like I think I would lean into like organized groups versus we're all going out tonight. I mean, unless that's something that you really, really have fun with, even then do balance. But just, if alcohol is something that leads to like self-destructive behavior, lean into the organized stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about just guys who just got out of a relationship, but maybe guys who maybe have been out of a relationship for a long period of time and are trying to re-enter the dating market as far as, getting to the point of saying, how do you determine if you're ready?
Yeah.
And I think that it's something that's where you kind of have to strike that balance.
Right, because
Right.
in those cases, I think a lot of the times, like I think you were mentioning that after, like a guy may not have looks maxed at that point. Like a
Yes.
guy, might need to focus his time on himself and just improving his health potentially, along with his looks. And I think that can be balanced. Like you don't have to go into full monk mode. I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
There's other things that a lot of content creators, especially the Manosphere, like to talk about, right? A lot of terms.
Yeah.
And
Oh my
I love
goodness.
seeing your content, like when you just fight against some of these terms that come
The
up.
war on the words.
And the first one I want to talk about is one that like I didn't even know until starting this podcast and having the first episode of Wheat Waffles. And he said it, and I'm like, what? Wait, what is SMV? What is that?
The sexual market felt like. I'm sorry. Are we going to Wuhan to buy bats? Like, it's a weird term. It's a weird term. Like, I started hearing it. Like, all these terms I didn't hear until TikTok. I never heard someone say a high value anything or anything like that. And it's interesting because it's you hear women doing it too. Like, if you know who like Ask Nelly is, the one who had the croissant video, she's talking about it too. So it's very much like a certain type of creator because there's kind of a toxic like female side of it where it's like if you've seen like the female dating strategy side of Reddit, it's very like uncomfortable. So it's very like
What do they
gender.
say?
It's just it's almost like they've tried to turn like some of these like manosphere things and make them like female centric where it's like it's weird. It's weird. Like I think it's very toxic. I think most normal women think it's creepy. They're like who's consuming this? But there's definitely like people of either gender that are trying to push these like put values onto feelings, and if you do this you'll go up 2 points and therefore you can date this person, and it's just it's a very weird way to think about things, and I never heard those terms until TikTok, and then every time I do I'm just like, what is going on with this? Like, this is just bizarre.
Yeah, I think I agree with you to a certain extent, but in other ways I think that they're kind of just shortcuts to bigger ideas. So for example, and I know a lot of them, especially I don't even like saying them because they're cringy, but I do all the time because like I'm in this world now and I interact with these different creators, and and so interacting with the male content creators, it's something that if you don't kind of have that vocabulary down, it's hard to have a conversation.
Right, because you would spend like 5 minutes
True.
just explaining who
Yeah.
or the type of person you're talking about
Exactly.
versus
Versus
like,
just saying
high
like
value.
saying Chad. Like
Yeah.
everybody knows
Yeah.
who we're talking about when we say that.
Yeah.
And versus saying it's a guy who has an abundance on dating apps.
Right.
For example.
Yeah.
So
and I get that. I understand that.
Yes.
I think the downside to that, and we've talked about this, is that like when you have those shorthand terms, is that they can actually end up meaning different things
Yes. So
depending
Yes.
on the person.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
So we've
with them.
talked about that with dad bods, right?
Yes.
Like there is a huge divide in
Yeah,
what a dad bod
Emily
is.
I almost had a podcast breakup because of that.
All over dad
no,
bods.
we were just kidding. But we did have a very different understanding of what that meant.
Right.
And that created something that we had to talk through.
Right.
And
So
then
like we were
what's-
arguing about the dad bod.
Yeah, not arguing, but
not
we-
arguing, but
disagree.
having a debate
Yeah.
about a dad bod. But come to find out, like it was just because of the definition of the term.
Yes.
And once we found that out, like we were actually
On the same
agreeing
page.
on the same page.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You see that across like everything related to dating. What does ghosting mean? One person's ghosting is you stop talking about a dating app. Another person, it's you came home and all their stuff was gone from the apartment. Or what's talking, what's dating, and you see weaponization of therapy words. Gaslighting all of a sudden means someone said something that kind of hurt my feelings.
Narcissism.
Narcissism.
Everyone's a narcissist now.
Yeah,
like
versus just being, somebody who's selfish.
exactly, and so so I think. And I know like people have kind of made jokes back to me that do use those terms and they're like, well, we got to call it something. Like I know they're kind of corny. That kind of had like laughed along with kind of the ridiculousness of it. But yeah, I think those words, they do have different definitions, and I think that can kind of trigger people's kind of perception, because there's some people like you hear high value man, high value woman. To some people that just means, when you ask them what that means to them, it means an honorable person, like someone who's says what they means what they say, like they get out of bed and they go to work and they're a responsible contributing member of society. But then you have someone, ask Nellie Sudry with her 800,000 followers going on to TikTok and saying, there are 4 unfakeable traits of a high value man. Number 1, he must make 100K or more. Number 2, he must be well groomed. And she's got these 4 firm traits on what a high value man is.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because I think something that comes with the following I have, regardless of gender, I like to think my following is a little bit of like dating for misfits in a way, where people that maybe feel excluded from those conversations because of something maybe out of their control. Like I have followers who are wheelchair users who are paralyzed, or like recently lost a limb from like a traumatic accident, getting back into dating again, or a lot of people that are like on the autism spectrum, because understanding what people mean when they're saying whatever, like it's kind of like, oh, here's what it could mean. People ex-Mormons, like that kind of thing, where they feel like excluded from these kinds of arbitrary things that make them like feel bad, and they want to get back into dating, find a real connection, and none of this advice kind of helps them. So I've kind of like rallied against it kind of for people that fall into kind of those buckets of people. And I also think like, everyone wants a person that is honorable, and it's just a frustrating term to hear. I also think nobody's self-aware. Everyone always assumes that they're this high-value person already, so therefore they deserve this high-value thing. I think as a whole, nobody's self-aware. No,
that's a really good point. I think that high value should be replaced with honorable.
Yes.
Because I think it says it all right there. And that's something that, so like we had a debate with Alex PWF, and his definition of high value was any man that has abundance. Like that's it, period. And, that's something that I disagreed with, because that that's his take on it. But I think we all have to be speaking the same language.
Yeah, because
first,
a man could have abundance but be completely emotionally immature.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And dishonorable.
Of course.
And so I think most
Yes.
women would look at that and think, no, that's not a high value man.
Yeah, exactly. There's plenty of guys who make 6 figures every year that are not good guys.
Right.
And there's plenty of guys who make 50 grand a year that are great. And so that's where, when you have lists of specific criteria, it gets all mixed up. And then the guys feel inadequate because they're not meeting those things. Like the laws of 6 and things like that. Like how many guys actually meet that? It's tiny percentile. So they end up feeling excluded. And then if they hear it from female creators, then they really feel, because then it's something like, okay, like if that's what defines a high value man, like I'm in trouble.
It's
You know?
it's super discouraging, and it just makes you feel just like you're inadequate. Like those kinds of things are often out of your control, and they don't account for like a lot of nuance that might be going on. Like we're in basically a recession again. There's layoffs out the wazoo. Like people have a bigger gap in age between themselves and their parents. So people are taking care of aging parents, like maybe moving back in to help them. And these kinds of things just, I think, aren't helpful in kind of today's society. I think the story matters a bit more, which is why I'm always like anti buzzwords. Like, what does whatever it is mean to you? Show, not tell. And kind of ask for things and without the buzzword, so people know what you mean. Like, people you'll see on dating apps too, when people say, "Oh, I'm looking for someone who doesn't take life too seriously." What does that mean? Someone who brings you peace. What does that mean to you? Kind of going away from like the buzzwords, even though it makes more words come out. But I think that's where like a lot of like confusion and frustration comes in, as far as like finding the right person.
Yeah, that's what the Manosphere has definitely gotten wrong, as far as not being consistent as far as definitions, because there is, all these different, kind of pills. And we just kind of did a video, a podcast about how, the pills have some relatability, but it really depends on who you are and who you're interacting with. It's not just this straight up simple situation.
Yeah, like the solutions that each pill is giving is not going to be the best solution depending on the man.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to be able to understand nuance.
Yeah.
And that just because someone's saying something, and guys are great at this, especially these creator types who are very smart, is that it's not what they say, it's how they say it. And if you say something with conviction that it's gospel truth, then a lot of guys end up believing this instead of saying, okay, like, let me take a different perspective, or let me just, think about things in a different manner versus, or like, there's I think a famous, I forgot exactly what the situation was, but anybody who's kind of in a leadership position, what they should do is they should have someone who they can bounce ideas off that's going to give them the opposite idea.
Oh, right.
So,
and like almost like disagree?
Disagree, yes. Just so that you can get a different perspective.
Absolutely.
So that's why I think a lot of these online debates are actually pretty healthy between creators.
Yeah.
Because then you can kind of pick and choose the things that you kind of agree with that make most sense to you. And most guys are pretty logical thinkers. So, but if you're only getting one perspective, then you're not getting the whole perspective.
That's a really good point.
So, and there are, great creators out there that do openly debate each other a lot. And so I think if you're a guy, taking a look at some of these debates and then taking what you can from it and then making your own decision versus having someone to make a decision for you.
Yeah. Well, I know Charlotte's on a time limit. You got a plane to catch.
Yes.
We are so thankful for you to have made the trip all the way here. I think that you offer some really solid perspectives. So for anyone watching this, where can they find you?
I'm on TikTok at Welcome to the Peasant Party. You are welcome to be my follower. I would be honored to have you. And yeah, it's been an honor to be here. And I know you've got a great audience. I love what you guys are doing. Just kind of having these uncomfortable conversations in a comfortable way without kind of the maybe rage bait that comes with it. And I think, young men who are having a hard time with dating is kind of just an ignored, I would say, demographic. And I think it's good to bring those other perspectives on and kind of show a wide range of viewpoints. So
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks. So everybody, please make a comment and hit that subscribe button. And thanks again, Charlotte, for coming all the way from Austin, Texas. It's been a pleasure.